This is the classiest animated GIF of fire that I could find. Out of the 40 plus hours that went into preparing this talk, like an hour was spent picking the right animated GIF of fire. So, who am I? My name is Alina MacKenzie. I'm an operations engineer. I started out as a developer many, many years ago, and I've been slowly and steadily moving towards operations engineering. It's kind of my thing. Within the last 4 months, I quit my job of 15 years. That is a long time in tech. That's like centuries. I did some consulting for a little bit, for a short while, and I have found another job. In the Twitterverse, you may find me as Czarodziejka, that's my username. And in the Drupalverse, my name is AliMac. A lot simpler, but AliMac was already taken on Twitter. Sad. Okay, this is Burnout at scale, and I've been inspired to prepare this talk because of my own experience with burnout. I am aiming this talk at anyone here who is feeling burnt out, and also at the people who have influence in their organizations and want to prevent or address burnout that's already there. Now, when I say organization, I try to pick kind of a neutral term. I mean a company, a shop, an agency, a nonprofit, a school, a university, or a government entity that you are working for. So, let's begin. We're going to start by taking a quick look around the internet at some of the things that are being said about burnout. This first article that I was able to find is titled Prescription for Burnout: 5 TED Talks that can help you beat burnout. And I thought, great, it's like a pill that you can take and then your burnout just goes away. I'm sure they're great TED Talks. They're usually pretty good. I think one of them is by Zay Frank, and he's a great speaker. The next article I was able to find is called Overcoming Burnout: 10 Steps to Reignite Your Flame and Shine Brightly Once More. Great, a 10-step program, awesome. It actually did have pretty good advice, which I think is worth passing on. It suggested to socialize outside of your professional group. Pretty solid, pretty solid. Okay, in case you need more TED Talks, Business Insider curated 11 TED Talks to watch when you're feeling totally burnt out. Finally, if Marissa Mayer, the CEO of Yahoo, was helping organize Drupal IronCamp, I would not be standing here talking to you, because Marissa Mayer thinks that burnout is a myth. All right. I was kind of hoping to find an article like, try this one weird old tip to cure your burnout, but I didn't, so maybe I have to write one. So, I've been thinking, have we reached peak burnout? All of these articles, all of these things that I found on the internet have one common theme. Burnout is presented as an individual problem, an individual failing or weakness. We talk about burnout of one, but I wondered, we talk a lot about it, what about burnout of the many? So in my quest, I wanted to see approaches to understanding burnout on a systemic level, putting burnout in the context of the environment in which burnout takes place. So I did the best thing I could think of, and I tweeted about it. Hey, this was just over a year ago. I said, we should talk about systemic causes of burnout in our workplaces and organizations. And this tweet got traction. I got like 25 reactions. Now, on a normal day, I'm lucky if somebody likes the photo of soup that I post. But 25 people reacted to it. So, I'm an engineer. When I find a problem, I usually start by Googling for it because I figure someone else must have had the same problem. So in this case, I did the same thing, right? Next step was to find someone else who was smart and who studied the subject in depth. There had to be somebody. And of course, I was able to find a book. The book was titled The Truth About Burnout. The truth about something. That means it's got to be real, right? But it was the subtitle that caught my attention. And I don't know if it's easy to see, but the subtitle is How Organizations Cause Personal Stress and What to Do About It. Jackpot. This book was first published in 1997. So almost 20 years ago, people were already talking about burnout. This is not a new thing. This didn't just started happening, within last year or two. This is one of the authors of the book, Christina Maslow. She is a professor of psychology at the University of California at Berkeley. How many people here have ever heard of the Stanford prison experiment? Okay, quite a few. It's a 1971 study of the psychological effects of becoming a prisoner or a prison guard. It's a classic study on the psychology of imprisonment, in which college students were taken, and half of them were given the role of prisoners, and the other half the role of prison guards. The person who was running the study, Philip Zimbardo, said that in only a few days, the guards became sadistic, and the prisoners became depressed and showed signs of extreme stress. Within 3 days, one prisoner had to be released because of a nervous breakdown. Out of the 50 people who came to observe the study, there was only one person who protested it, and that was Christina Maslow. She went on to become a full professor in Berkeley and studied the processes of dehumanization, which I think is very key to burnout, because I think it's a very dehumanizing process, very dehumanizing thing that can happen to a person. So Maslow wanted to study cognitive reframing, which is a fancy way of saying how people deal with strong emotions in jobs where you need to retain your calm and remain collected. So she started off with interviewing people in the human services professions, such as healthcare, social services, criminal justice, ministry, psychological services. And she wasn't really getting the answers to the questions she was asking, but instead people were coming up to her and saying, let me tell you about my job. Like, you want to hear about burnout? I'll tell you. So this is how she started to get interested in studying occupational burnout. So the plan for this talk is one, I want to talk about what are the results of burnout and why should we care. Two, what makes up burnout, really? Three, what is the opposite of burnout? What does that even look like? Four, talk about areas of organizational life in which burnout can occur. And five, strategies for addressing burnout, both on an organizational level and individual level. Now, this talk focuses on work burnout. There's also burnout in open source, burnout in contributing, burnout in tech in general. But I'm focusing on burnout at work, although a lot of these concepts will probably be applicable to other types of burnout. So, if burnout was a pack of cigarettes being sold in the United States, it would come with like the Surgeon General's warning. Well, what would the warning be for burnout? First is poor quality of work. When a person is burnt out, they are very likely to do the minimum, to not go above and beyond. And even if they keep doing what they're doing, even they show up to work, they might not have that spark for innovation. They might not experiment, which experimentation can often lead to new stuff, innovation. It's not that people just start building crooked websites that are full of bugs, right? It goes beyond the number of tickets that you close, the number of features that you ship. When a person is burnt out, they start cutting back on the time that they collaborate with other people. They also cut back on mentoring other coworkers. If a person is going to be burnt out, they're not going to do any kind of outreach or recruitment. And really, the best form of recruitment is a happy employee. A person who's burnt out is not a happy employee. As an example of this, when a couple of months ago at the previous organization, I was going to a meetup, and at the time, the organization was hiring, and I thought, well, I'm just going to go and announce to the meetup that, hey, we're hiring. And as I was surrounded, this was Chicago Women's Developer meetup, as I was surrounded by these amazing women doing all these different things, working on all these different projects, I thought to myself, I don't want them to be as miserable as I am. So I never said anything. Another effect of burnout is low morale and satisfaction. You're not feeling good about the job. You're not highly motivated. You start to withdraw from aspects of work, from social aspects, maybe even decision making. Perhaps you start holding back at meetings, because why bother whenever key decisions are being made? You might be, a person who's burnt out might prevent the organization, might cause the organization to make mistakes because they don't speak up. So from an organizational perspective, a voice is missing. It's not being expressed. Physical illness is another effect of burnout. Insomnia, not getting enough sleep, gastrointestinal problems, hypertension, heart condition, anxiety, panic attacks. I've had those. Dysfunction in personal life. Burnout is not a work uniform, right? It's not a hat that you just hang when you leave work. You end up taking things home. And to cope, a person who's burnt out might increase their use of alcohol or drugs. Burnout is a corrosive agent that erodes your relationships with your colleagues, the people who love you outside of work, the people that you need to remain a happy person. Burnout is also, another effect of burnout is low self-esteem, which can lead to depression and suicide, which has definitely happened in the larger tech community. Burnout can also lead to absenteeism and turnover. The people who can get out will get out. Maslow said, and this is really surprising, that in some organizations, people at management level were saying, thank goodness for burnout. It means we don't have to fire people. It means less paperwork, and it just weeds them out, which I think is quite brutal. But turnover isn't just subtracting an employee from the organization. You're also subtracting the employee from other employees. Does anybody recognize this board game? It's called Pandemic. It's a collaborative game where players don't compete against one another, but they work together. And the objective is to cure 4 diseases that are symbolized by colored cubes. The board itself is a map of the world, and there's cities that are connected, and so when there are outbreaks, they kind of move along and infect other cities. And you have to cure this disease before time runs out, or the diseases take over the world. So how can burnout affect people around us? Well, think about a person experiencing burnout as one of those cities, and they've got 3 cubes, which is the maximum that a city can handle, and now there's an outbreak, and it just starts spreading to other people. It's a cascading effect, and it can destabilize an organization. So to recap, the effect of burnout is that there is a cost to the individual, to an organization, and to the people that the person comes in contact with, like family, customers, coworkers. Economic values, such as profits, are often the primary driving force of how a lot of organizations do things, right? Human concerns are often not addressed until they have some kind of impact on those economic values. Think about discussions of social issues like diversity, like inclusion, like representation. Arguments for those things are often framed in economic terms. And I am not saying that's good or bad, but that's often the case. I think that we need to affirm the value of humanity just beyond the economic value. And with that in mind, I'm going to jump into what makes up burnout. Now, what are these dimensions? Like, are we talking about burnout in time and space? No, they're sort of like stages, but not necessarily linear. So dimensions, is kind of a word that describes it. This first dimension of burnout is exhaustion. This is the first thing that people think of when they think about burnout, the individual stress. It's related to work overload, when you don't have enough resources to meet the demand, or when your resources are spread too thin over a wide and varying landscape of demands. Exhaustion manifests itself in changes in terms of health. Physical exhaustion, feeling brain dead, irritable, emotionally fried, overextended, drained, used up. Basically, you're unable to unwind and recover. You might start to lack energy to face another project or even talk to another person. Another dimension of burnout is cynicism. This is when your thoughts about the job that you're doing are shifting in a persistent negative direction. You have a negative, hostile reaction to the people in your workplace. You start to back off from the job because you don't want to be there, right? You shift how you do your work from doing your best to just kind of doing the minimum necessary to checking out. Now, if you think about it, this dimension, or this stage, is a natural reaction to that first one, to exhaustion. Because if you have too much to do and not enough resources to do it, the response is often to cut back. This is an attempt to protect yourself from exhaustion and from disappointment. And people feel that it might be safer to be indifferent, especially when the future, work-related future, is uncertain. When this sets in, when cynicism sets in, it's very hard to turn around, and it will take a lot of work to get out of this. The last and final dimension is ineffectiveness. And in the study, Maslow found that this happens usually later than earlier. This is when that negative feeling, that cynicism, turns inward on yourself. If this kicks in, it could be a precursor to mental health issues such as depression. This is when you give yourself a negative self-evaluation, you're just feeling negative about what you're doing, you feel ineffective, inadequate, you lose confidence. Every project just seems like it's beyond your capabilities, even if you're perfectly capable of doing it. It's a vicious circle in a way because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because as you're losing confidence in yourself, other people around you might start losing confidence in you. And you kind of start wondering, what am I even doing here? So, this right here is the shit pie of burnout. I chose these colors on purpose. You're chronically exhausted, you're cynical, you're detached from your work, and you're increasingly ineffective on the job. Now, burnout is not an acute form of stress, right? It doesn't happen because of just one bad project or one single event. It's a chronic condition. It's not a response to a major crisis. And it's a reaction to prolonged stressors in the workplace over time. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. You may see this in yourself. You may see it in other people. You may see it before they even see it. Conversely, other people may see it in you before you do. Okay, wow, Alina, you sure depressed us. So let's flip it around a little bit. Let's approach it from the other end. What does the opposite of burnout look like? Well, instead of exhaustion, you have energy. You have enthusiasm about your work. Yay, work. You're ready to commit time and effort to the job tasks that you have on your plate. Instead of cynicism, you are involved. You are not dreading Monday, or whenever you start working. You are looking forward to going to work. You want to be there. And you feel involved in the work activities in the workplace, and you find them meaningful. Finally, instead of ineffectiveness, you are efficacious. You have a sense of accomplishment. You feel that you have that power to do the things that you want to do, and you feel good about what you are able to do. You feel competent and effective. So, we can kind of see that these dimensions of burnout occur on a kind of scale, a continuum. How do we do the things that will lead people to have and retain that enthusiasm, that they want to be involved and feel effective? And sometimes getting rid of those negatives is is different than building the positives. And in some occupations, negatives come as part of the territory. And often there's not much that you can do to reduce those negatives. At one point, I used to work as help desk support. And I mean, there's no way to get rid of all the people calling about the problems they're having. They're not going to call you when things are good. They're always calling you when things are bad. And they're always very unhappy. So there's no way to reduce that because that's the job, dealing with unhappy people. But there's a way to build up positives that could carry you a long way. Maslow gives a great example of this. In her career as a professor, as a teacher, she spends a lot of time preparing her lectures and then tells students, well, come see me at my office hours if you need anything, if you are confused or something. And, people come to her office hours and it's always complaints about grades. Like, can you increase this grade? I need to make, a higher grade. It's always not understanding things, questioning stuff. So what she started doing is that she would tell their students to, come to office hours if they don't understand something, but to also come and share what they found helpful, what they found interesting and good. And, they started doing that. Her students started coming in not just to complain about grades, but also to tell her, hey, that thing that you explained, I found an article about it, and here you go. So this is how she was feeling more engaged. It's kind of a low-cost way to support engagement. So it could just be as effective to focus on building engagement than just reducing burnout. The key thing that Maslow learned from research is that where you are on that burnout engagement scale or continuum, it depends on a fit or a match between you, the person, and the workplace within 6 areas of what are called the work-life quality. The more matches you have, the higher engagement. It also means that there are more opportunities to do something about burnout. And how an organization approaches these areas, these work-life quality areas, kind of builds up a profile of the organization. And these profiles can sometimes, vary between different groups within an organization if it's large enough. So let's go through these 6 areas of work-life quality. The first is workload. When you have a mismatch in workload between the job situation and the person has too much to do, too little time, the demands are too high, resources scarce, there's constant interruption, frequent context switching. When there's a mismatch in workload, it is predictive of the exhaustion dimension of burnout. Now, the opposite of that, when you have a match, then you have a manageable workload. You feel like you've accomplished something by the end of each day, and you balance work and outside life. And you also have some ability to monotask. Being a great firefighter looks great from the inside, but from the outside, it looks like a bunch of excuses for not improving. If your team doesn't have enough people, and you are constantly firefighting without respite, your skills are atrophying. This quote comes from Effective DevOps by Jennifer Davis and Catherine Daniels. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. People often think that working too hard is causing burnout, but in what Maslow found in the research is that it's going to be some other 5 areas, not just workload. So let's move to the next area of work-life quality. It's control. Control is how much say or discretion you have, how much choice you have over your tasks. When you have a mismatch in the area of control, you're being micromanaged. You lack influence, you lack discretion, autonomy. The worst thing that can happen is when you're held accountable for things over which you do not have any kind of control. Or it could be a chaotic environment where it's not clear who has control over what. When you have a match in the area of control, you have input. You are making decisions and choices. You might not have total control, but you can shape what it is that you're doing. Low control leads to high burnout. Reward is another area of work-life quality. Reward is a psychological principle of recognition. It's the positive feedback that you get when you do something well. Do people notice? Do you get praise? Do you get a raise? When you have a mismatch in this area, you don't get a lot of appreciation for what you do. And the rewards that you get are inequitable, and you often face drudgery. Now, when you have a match in the area of reward, you get recognition, and you get some kind of economic benefits, some kind of reasonable financial returns that make you happy. And you have enjoyable work. You know, in many instances, the recognition by others counts a lot more psychologically than tangible things. But you know what? We all have to eat. So tangible things matter as well. Another area of work-life quality is community. And this is a very important one. Your work community, it includes more than just your colleagues. It includes your managers, people that report to you, vendors, clients. Your coworkers have the skills, the information, and materials that you need to get your job done. And people will share more readily when they trust you or when they trust each other. Now, in hostile workplaces, that's not going to happen. Those places eat away at a person's ability to focus and do the work. When you have a mismatch in the area of community in the workplace, you have things like isolation, conflict, lack of respect, not getting enough social support from others, not sharing information, no trust, unresolved conflicts, and no process for addressing those conflicts. Essentially what it is, it's a socially toxic workplace. When you have a match in the area of community, you have cohesion, cooperation, social support, respectful handling of disagreements. It doesn't mean you don't have disagreements with people, you just handle them respectfully. Another quote from my favorite book, Effective DevOps, which I also ended up tweeting, and that also got a lot of traction. Giving people the time and space to strengthen bonds leads to better retention. We often stay at jobs longer than intended because people make the difference. I thought about that quote a lot because there's a reason why I was at that job for 15 years. Another area of work-life quality is fairness. This is that sense of social justice about who gets what assignments, who gets promoted. When people perceive their environment to be unfair, their primary reaction is going to be resentment, anger, hostility. When you have a mismatch in this area, there is often secretive political deals, cliques, lack of procedural justice. It's all about who you know. When you have a match, there is open resource allocation. There's an effective appeal procedure and transparency. Now remember, I said perceive their environment. This is all about perception. Things may or may not be unfair, but they are perceived as such. And if people feel this, this is gonna drive their behavior. This area is when there is a mismatch in this area of fairness, this is most closely tied to the rise of cynicism. Maslow found that this was an early warning sign that people who perceived favoritism, cheating, or other inequities were more likely to be burnt out by the end of the study. Conversely, employees who viewed the workplace as being fair, but maybe lacking in the other areas, or having mismatches in the other areas, they tended to tilt back toward being engaged with their workplace. The last area is values. This is what makes life meaningful. What is it about the work that I'm doing that is consistent with the values that I'm pursuing in life in general? When you have a mismatch in this area, you have ethical conflicts. What you believe versus what the job asks you to do, as well as a mismatch between what the organization preaches versus what it practices. The organization might say something like, we believe in providing customer-oriented service, but then your performance is evaluated on upsells and selling things that the customer doesn't need. That's a value conflict. It could also be a conflict between organizational values. For example, an organization might say, we believe in work-life balance, but then the policies and practices don't really reflect that. When you have a match in the area of values, you have meaningful work and you have some overlap between your personal and organizational values. Okay, to review, the 6 areas where the mismatch between the job and the person can occur are workload, control, reward, community, fairness, and values. There is an American psychologist named Abraham Maslow who posited that physiological needs need to be addressed before certain psychological needs can be pursued. And he came up with this hierarchy that's expressed in this pyramid called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we can kind of map those areas, those work-life areas, to these needs here. So for basic needs, think about compensation, which aligns with reward and fairness. For safety and security, employees need to feel that they're assured that their job is not going to disappear on them, that their work is valued by the organization, and that the organization will be forthcoming about the things that might impact the life of the employee, such as potential layoffs. This aligns with control and community. For belonging, people need to feel comfortable in their workplace and appreciated by the managers and their peers. This aligns with community and reward. And finally, for self-esteem and self-actualization needs, you want to feel proud of what work you're doing, which aligns with values. So, we have, as leading things that contribute to burnout, work overload, lack of control, insufficient reward, breakdown of community, absence of fairness, and value conflicts. The more mismatches you have, the more burnout you get. So burnout, is it the fault of the person or the fault of the job? Well, when we focus on people's behaviors, we tend to focus on people's problems and make burnout a personal issue, a character flaw. And this focus on the individual is why majority of burnout prevention techniques kind of focus on change that is at the scope of a person. What's wrong with that person? They're not tackling the larger environmental and social system issues. There are personal change programs or stress relief workshops. They're liked by organizations because they're very low cost, but they're also low return on investment. And a lot of employees find them demeaning and patronizing. It kind of says to the person, you don't know how to take care of yourself. And sometimes, even if you take that stress management workshop and you change your behavior, well, that doesn't really change the environment that you operate in. The research data from Maslow's study shows that it's really the job situation, what's happening in those work situations, that is primarily responsible for burnout. So is it the job or the person? I would say both. You have to look at the person in the context to understand what's going on. And the context is the workplace, the relationship that the person has with other people. So let's look at 2 organizational approaches to addressing burnout. And Maslow has case studies of both approaches, along with some success stories. The 2 approaches are bottom-up, a grassroots approach, and top-down, initiated by management. In this first approach, which is bottom-up, you start with a person that knows the 6 areas of work-life quality and how mismatches can cause burnout. This person has the ability to work with their colleagues because you can't do this kind of thing alone. And they have a commitment to stick with the process of change. So this person comes in, formulates a plan with their colleagues, because, hey, you are the subject matter expert on your job situation. They form some kind of group project and eventually go to the organization's management to get that organizational buy-in to implement whatever plan of change that they want to propose. Of course, this won't work if the organization is not supportive. So it's kind of risky. One, you need that organizational buy-in, and two, this could be something that's beyond the resources of a group of burnt-out employees. The second approach is top-down, organizational checkup. It starts with the management, and it becomes an organizational project. It connects with the people in the organization, because any kind of organizational intervention to build engagement and to prevent burnout, it has to be an inclusive project. Right? It is not something that you do to people. It has to be done with people. Okay, well, what do you get out of this? A burnout-proof organization? Do you get certification that you're burnout-free? No. Like documentation and security, the outcome is a process. So, how do you start? Are you familiar with financial audits that organizations do? Security audits? Well, those are standard operating procedures for assessing how an organization deals with its financial responsibilities. A staff audit, an organizational checkup, assesses how the organization deals with responsibilities to its employees. The goal here is to identify problem areas, kind of like you would go to a doctor and get your vitals checked, your blood work done. It's very similar to looking at a dashboard of all your servers and seeing, oh, which ones are down and which ones I have to take a look at. An effective organizational strategy begins with a staff survey to assess key aspects of organizational life. It is essential that the staff survey be accurate, timely, and meaningful. There has to be a meaningful flow of information. The participation of this survey has to be high. In the studies that Maslow did, they aimed for 80 to 90% of participation in the organization. And you'll have to work hard to get that high number of participants. It has to be anonymous, it has to be confidential, and if you have a large enough organization, you can break it up into smaller organizational units. There are two phases. One is finding out what's going on with the organization, and the second one is sharing those results with other people. This is not a survey that you take and only like the CEO looks at. This is something that you want to share with everybody. Okay, what goes into the survey? One, you ask questions about the 3 dimensions of burnout and the 6 areas of work-life quality. And you also ask questions about related to management areas, such as communication. Are the staff getting clear and credible messages from management? Supervision. Are people feeling like they're being supported? That people are responsive? That their managers are responsive? That they're effective? Professional development. Is there support for skill enhancement, for doing work that builds skills, for a work culture that encourages learning? Cohesiveness. Are you supported within your work group? Are there shared values of a work group? You ask about perception of change, the view of the organization over time, and you ask about the confidence in the organization's future. It's basically an overall assessment of the organization from the point of view of the employee. What that builds is an organizational profile as a whole, and then a breakdown of subunits. Now, you might find that burnout is prevalent in some groups, but not others, or different groups might be dealing with problems in different areas. The report stage is critical to success of the survey and of the whole endeavor. The report has to be short, it has to be timely, and it has to address the objectives. Okay, You've done the survey, you've shared the results, now what? Well, there's not a simple answer. The factors in work environment play a large role in predicting and influencing burnout, more so than individual variables. Building this profile will help you clear any kind of wrong assumptions that could lead to solutions that completely miss the mark. Sometimes it's not what people expect. A common expectation is that it's workload or reward that is the problem area that's causing burnout. But sometimes it could be something in the other 4 areas that makes the workload difficult. For example, hiring more people to deal with workload won't resolve any burnout that's being fueled by a breakdown in community at the workplace, or issues of fairness. Change and improvement will not happen overnight. It takes time to implement. And as a rule of thumb that Maslow points out, implementation of change is the most difficult because the expectations of success are often not realistic. No matter what the change is, even if it's the best thing, it actually might get worse before it gets better. Why worse? Because it'll be different. There will be glitches, missteps. Has anybody here ever remodeled their house? Right? You're remodeling, you get everything looks like a big mess before it eventually gets better. It's kind of like that. What you want to do, though, is come back within a year or 2 and do another checkup. You got to know what the goals are. What are you aiming for? Sustainable workload. Now, if this laptop is at 100% CPU usage or memory usage, that's not a good thing. So why do we expect the same of ourselves or fellow humans? Sustainable workload allows you to keep going and to come back energized, and also allows you for experimentation, which can lead to innovations. Choice and control. Appropriate choice and control in what you do. Recognition and reward, both intrinsic and extrinsic. There's this interesting conversation on Twitter that happened a couple of months ago, where one person said, remember folks, your staff are motivated by autonomy, mastery, and purpose, not cash, ping pong, or desk beers. And another person responded, honestly, I'm also quite motivated by cash, and it would be nice to stop thinking of software developers as aspirational aesthetics. The word aesthetic, I didn't know what that meant. I looked it up. It means characterized by severe self-discipline and abstention from all forms of indulgence. So long story short, pay people well. Supportive work community. It has open communication, way to resolve conflicts, and you can trust each other. I couldn't resist another quote from Effective DevOps. Employees that trust in their organization to support them can take the time they need to invest in themselves and in their skills, strengthening the connections in their work and reducing the risk of burnout. High-trust organizations are positively correlated with higher quality of work. And you want your employees to have the ability to trust their own judgment. Fairness, respect, and justice. We will lose trust in an organization that shows no fairness, because it implies that those in authority are not honest and do not respect who we are. And finally, clear values and meaningful work. Okay, so in preparing this talk, I struggled how personal I was going to make it, and how much I was going to talk from my personal experience. So I wrote this open letter to anyone in the audience who might be feeling burnt out. In 19th century factories during the Industrial Revolution, workers were often seen as cogs in machines, easily replaced. And considerable effort was made to end those exploitative labor practices through legislation and protests. But the idea of the workplace as an inhumane, efficient machine feeding on talent is back. Organizations often do not expect to retain their employees for a long time. And let's face it, they are unlikely to serve your long-term interests. So, what do? If you're feeling stuck, you form a company of one. Even if you're an employee, Start thinking of yourself as an independent contractor, even if you are not. Make the primary focus preparing yourself for your next career opportunity, whether it comes or not. You will need to stick to a routine, even when pressured to behave otherwise. An example of this, not my personal experience, but someone I know, there was a network engineer I have worked with, and she was also feeling burnt out, especially there was a mismatch in the area of reward for her. And what she did was every day at lunch for a couple of weeks or months, she studied for certification. Eventually she got an offer and then a counter offer, which reduced her burnout. Physical fitness. Now, I'm not framing this in diet or weight loss or BMI or other that bullshit, but rather self-care. A healthy way of life increases your resilience, and you want your company of one to be resilient. Combination of sufficient exercise, nutrition, sleep, don't forget sleep, reduces your vulnerability to exhaustion. Your job, I'm not kidding you, your job is not going to change, but you will increase your endurance. And example of this in my own personal experience, I have none because I'm really bad at physical fitness. Terrible at it. Recovery cycles. Key step, you have to have a firm structure for recovery activities. If you don't have a structure, you won't make time for recovery. So incorporate small amounts of exercise or rest or recovery into the workday. If you have a friend at work, very important, recruit them and share some kind of burnout reduction thing, like a short midday walk, for example. Mutual support can be really, really powerful. From my experience, me and my office mate, every day at lunch, we would shut off our computers, our emails, and we would watch My Little Pony. And I would always try to guess like what the plot twist was going to be, and she would be like, "Shut up, just enjoy it." Positive feedback. We know that receiving good vibes from others is uplifting, but so is expressing them to others. So it's really, really tough to do when you're burnt out, because burnout corrodes your empathy, and it's very, very crucial to hold on to that empathy. Keep a tally of your own acts of kindness towards your colleagues. Example of this from my experience, I built a chatbot that would give kudos and props to other people. So when my coworkers did something for me or performed a task, I would say, "Hey, username ++," and it would give them points. The points didn't matter. It was more about the expression of the thank you. And finally, job crafting. Job crafting is when you identify duties that you find tedious and aspects of your job that you find fulfilling, and attempt to increase the instances of the fulfilling work and reduce the aspects that you find not fulfilling. Your job is a collection of tasks, of interpersonal relationships that are assigned to you within an organization. So try and redesign your job as much as you can to get more satisfaction out of it. Alter boundaries by taking on more or less tasks, change how you perform tasks, alter the nature or extent of the kind of interactions that you have with other people, like try and avoid assholes. You very likely have more latitude in your work than you think. Example of this, in my experience, I started job crafting to move away from development into operations, just step by step, doing little things. Okay. If you are feeling burnt out and you want some cathartic reading, I highly recommend The Truth About Burnout. It was like chicken soup for my burnt out soul. And it's like quite inexpensive from like Amazon or whatever. The second book that I recommend is Effective DevOps. If you are like, oh, DevOps, buzzwordy, forget the DevOps and focus on the subtitle, which is Building a Culture of Collaboration, Affinity, and Tooling at Scale. Because everything is better when you add at scale at the end. There's a lot of actionable advice in this book, a lot of stories, and it's been recently published, so it's like fresh, delicious butter croissant. It's just amazing. On my website, I have like resources and links to like everything that I used to build this talk. So like if you want to know like where that GIF of fire came from, like I actually have that sourced, and a lot of studies and articles about burnout. I want to hear from you. A number of people came up to talk to me after my talk in Dublin. So I want to know what your thoughts are on being burnt out. Talk to me, and thank you very much for being such a captive audience.